everybody. Welcome to Iran, the Untold Story podcast, where I'm joined today by my guest, Mahan Taraj. Mahan is a jurist and a women's and human rights activist who joins me from Paris in France. Mahan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Azadeh. Thanks for having me.
Mahan, perhaps we could start off by you giving a brief introduction to yourself for our listeners and our viewers, please.
Yes, of course. Well, I was born in Iran. I grew up there until I was 6 years old. My parents were and still are supporters of the People Mujahedin Organization of Iran, the PMOI, which is the largest group of opposition to the mullah's regime. I was 6 years old in 1987 when my parents, my 1-year-old sister and we arrived in France. Like many Iranian refugees, my parents had to start their lives from scratch here. I grew up in the city of Lyon. I decided to study law, so I went to law school both in France and in the United States. After university, I moved to Paris to begin my career as an in-house lawyer for a large French international company. And currently, I'm working as compliance director for a major French fintech.
Wonderful. And could you tell me about your relationship with the Iranian resistance?
Of course. As I mentioned, my parents have always been supporters of the PMOI, both in Iran and in France, ever since they arrived here 37 years ago. One of my aunts, Mahboube-e-Kia, was a member of the PMOI, and because of this, she was actively sought by the regime's pastors. She had to live in hiding to avoid arrest. And in Iran, my parents helped her to live in hiding to keep her safe. I was a small child at that time, but I have actually very clear memories of my aunt Mahboube hiding in our house in Karaj. She would hide in a closet or under the bed whenever anyone visited, even close family members or close friends. My parents didn't want anyone to know she was with us, as of course this would have led to her arrest and probably to her execution. Finally, my parents managed to help my aunt to leave Iran clandestinely. She joined the PMOI once in France and continued her struggle against the mullah's regime. Eventually, she joined the PMOI Army of Liberation in Iraq, in the border between Iran and Iraq. And she was killed by the regime in 1988 during the military operation called Purure Javidan. I would like here to salute the memory of all the victims of the Iranian resistance who actually sacrificed their lives for freedom, democracy, and particularly my aunt Mahboube-e-Kia. Growing up, I was surrounded by parents who were active in the opposition, by friends who were also supporters or members of the PMOI. Personally, I could have chosen to live a normal life, ignoring the struggle of the Iranian people and their resistance, thinking that actually this struggle wasn't my concern, but only my parents' concern. But that was not my choice. I'm both French and Iranian, and because I'm also Iranian, I mean, remaining indifferent to the situation of the Iranian people facing the mullah's theocracy has never been an option for me. My parents came here as political refugees, and this gave me a sense of moral duty to be active in the Iranian resistance and to do actually what I reasonably can for this cause. I feel it's my responsibility to be the voice of the Iranian people at my level. And it's not only my personal or professional career that matter, but I have this duty towards the Iranian people. Early on, I asked myself which group, party, or organization I should support in this struggle. I wanted actually to make this choice independently of my parents' decision to support the PMOI. Therefore, what I did is that I studied and considered the various opposition movements in exile, from monarchists to communists. And after having done that, and after careful consideration, I chose to support the PMOI.
And you've mentioned your family background, and of course, they were within the movement and supporters of the PMOI. And you mentioned the case of your aunt. But may I ask you, Mahan, why you particularly support the PMOI? What sort of informed your choice to support the movement?
Yes. Well, the reason is clear. I mean, it is a movement that defends principles and values with which I'm perfectly aligned. You know, the 10-point plan proposed by Mrs. Mariam Rajavi for a free Iran is a perfect illustration of these principles and these values. It outlines a vision for a free, secular, democratic republic, a non-nuclear Iran, with freedom of speech, freedom of political parties, commitment to individual and social freedoms and rights in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Also, I consider myself as a feminist, and gender equality is crucial to me. And in this respect, I have seen personally how the PMOI and the NTRI have implemented gender equality within their own organizations. As you may know, women represent 56% of the NTRI members, and the whole PMOI governing body is composed of women. And of course, the NTRI president-elect for the transition period is a woman, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi. So the fact that gender equality is not just a concept, but is actively practiced, implemented in the PMY and the NTRI is something which is really impressive and important to me. And speaking maybe of Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, she's a Muslim woman. She wears the headscarf, which is absolutely not a problem for me, as long as the principle she and the PMOI defend is the freedom to wear the headscarf or not to wear it. And I've been a supporter of the PMOI for many years now, and actually not once in my personal life, not once during all that time, has any member of the organization asked me about my religion, whether I was practicing Islam or not, or any question about my religious beliefs. Not a single time. And I'm not a religious person. I don't consider having a religion. I really mentioned this to illustrate my experience with the PMOI and how respectful they are of everyone's personal convictions. Of course, PMOI members are Muslim, they practice Islam, and the women wear the headscarves within the PMOI. But this is a personal belief they have that they do not impose on others. Secularism is what they defend, and this is why I support them.
Amazing. And you're absolutely right. As you say, as a secular Iranian, as a religious Iranian, a non-religious Iranian, it's that freedom that speaks so much of the values of the resistance. I understand, Mahan, that you have recently launched a French language podcast that you're running, which translates into English as Iran Decrypted. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the podcast that you're running and also what prompted you to start the podcast and to initiate really this program on Iran.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Azadeh, for mentioning this project that indeed I recently started. As I said, I consider it my responsibility, my moral duty to do what I can for the Iranian resistance. So a few months ago, I came up with the idea of creating a podcast in French called L'Iran décrypté, which indeed means Iran decrypted, with the objective to factually and objectively counter all the accusations of demonization made against the PMOI. To do this, I interview experts, personalities, Iranians involved in the resistance. For me, this is quite an ambitious project because I'm neither a podcast professional nor a journalist. So I devote quite some time of my personal time, my weekends basically, to work on it. It's an exciting project. It allows me to continue learning a lot about Iran and the history of the Iranian resistance. I'm doing this project also, and I think it's important to mention it, with the help of my husband, who is French, and who helps me a lot, in particular for all the technical editing aspects of the project. So, yes, this podcast project is one of my contributions, I would say, to supporting the Iranian resistance.
Well, unfortunately, I am a terrible speaker of French, but I do look forward to listening to Iran Decrypted if it comes out with English subtitles. And you mentioned during your podcast that you're speaking to Iranians from all walks of life, experts in their fields, rights activists. And I wondered, you say that you've learned a great deal from producing these podcasts. I wondered if you had a message for people who may be listening or watching this podcast who perhaps don't know very much information about the Iranian resistance, or who maybe are just learning very slowly about this movement. What message do you have for them?
Well, first of all, I'd like to tell them that I know it can be scary to get close to this movement, given all the misinformation campaigns about it. The regime employs considerable efforts and invests significant resources, both inside and outside Iran, to demonize the PMOI through documentaries, TV programs, movies, articles, so-called associations or NGOs. They even infiltrate networks of experts, journalists, politicians in the US and in Europe. The accusations are always the same, that the movement has no popular support, that it's a cult, that they are terrorists, they are Marxists, they betrayed Iran by supporting Saddam Hussein, and the list goes on and on. For example, a few days ago in France, an article was published in a very famous newspaper, which repeated exactly the same kind of accusations against the PMOI. So I have to admit, the regime is quite effective at spreading this type of misinformation against the movement. So given this context, my message to Iranians who are not familiar with the PMOI is to look beyond those demonization campaigns and take the time to learn about the movement by themselves, as I did. Read reliable sources of information that are not directly or indirectly linked to the regime. And if they can, go and meet supporters or members of the PMOI. And always stick to the facts. ask yourself, why has the regime been working so hard against the PMOI for over 40 years? Also, how has this movement managed to survive all these decades despite this intense repression it has suffered? For me, it is clear and obvious that the regime sees the PMOI as a threat because it's a popular, well-organized movement capable of overthrowing the regime. So yes, in conclusion, my message is not to limit yourself to the regime's demonizing accusations, go beyond them, get informed, talk to supporters of the movement, and form your own opinion objectively.
And you clearly, Mahan, are a passionate and staunch supporter of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And as you say, it's important for others who are perhaps not as informed as you are on the movement to undertake independent research and to speak to Iranians such as yourself. And I think that's probably why your French language podcast is such a valuable resource that people can turn to. And I wondered, Mahan, if finally you could leave our listeners and our viewers with 3 words, 3 adjectives that for you best describe the Iranian resistance movement, and also why you choose those 3 words.
Yes. It's a difficult question. I'm sure you know that because so many words come to my mind to describe the movement: courage, resilience, strength, humanity, and so on. But if I had to choose only 3, I would say first, tenacity. Why? Because they have been fighting the regime for over 40 years, despite all the repression, obstacles, attacks, torture, executions, and they continue to resist and they never give up so far. I mean, that's why I've chosen tenacity to illustrate that. The second one is reliability. The PMOI is an extremely well organized, highly structured organization whose analysis of the geopolitical and strategic situation in Iran have always proved accurate and reliable. Just to give one example, from the very beginning, the PMI has maintained that the mullah's regime cannot be reformed. They have always stated that the narrative of a moderate versus conservative faction in the regime was just a strategy of the regime to ensure its survival. The PMI has always had this position that, the only way to achieve democracy and freedom in Iran is to overthrow the regime entirely. The conclusion that the regime cannot be reformed is one that many have reached recently, especially following the movement after Mahsa Amini's death. However, the PMI held this position from the start. So, reliability, because actually, yes, all their analysis, positions are really reliable and accurate. And this was just one example I wanted to give, but globally, I'm really impressed by how their analysis of the situation in Iran and in the Middle East is so accurate. The third word I have chosen is independence. The organization has never been and is not dependent on any foreign country or foreign interests. The Iranian regime, again, often tries to delegitimize the PMOI by portraying the organization as a puppet of foreign powers. For example, the regime has accused the PMOI of being supported by Saddam Hussein in the past. However, as everybody knows, Saddam Hussein's regime has been gone for many years, and the PMOI is still here. So yes, this was again one example, but yes, the PMOI is an independent organization, financially funded only by its supporters. Also, why independence is really important for me, it's given Iran's history, especially during the Shah's regime, and the extent of Iran's submission to foreign countries at that time. We do not want history to repeat itself. We want an independent Iran where the interests of the country are aligned with those of the Iranian people. So that's why why independence is key for me.
So tenacity, reliability, and independence. Three wonderful words to describe the Iranian resistance movement. Mahan, I really do appreciate your time. I know how extraordinarily busy you are with the podcast and with all of your activism, but I very much do appreciate the time that you've given us. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Azadeh. And Azadeh, I'd like also to thank you for taking the initiative of creating this podcast and standing with the Iranian resistance as well. Thank you, Azadeh.
Thank you so much.